Back in ancient Rome, life wasn't exactly easy. Food spoiled fast, summers were scorching, winters could be cruel, and there were no fridges, only clever tricks passed down through generations. But Romans were nothing if not resourceful. They discovered foods that could last forever without any cooling, preservatives, and they were all time-tested methods that worked. Here are 15 foods the Romans always kept in their storerooms, ready to last for months, years, or even centuries. And first up is the one thing that could save your dinner, your rations, and maybe even your life. 1. Salt, among the most revered substances in a Roman household or military camp, was salt. Salt held a central place in Roman life. More than just a seasoning, salt was a symbol of stability, trade, and preservation. Its ability to draw moisture out of food prevented bacterial growth, allowing meats and fish to last far beyond their natural shelf life. Roman soldiers, farmers, and merchants all relied on salted foods, especially during times when fresh produce or meat was scarce. Salted pork, in particular, was a staple for the Roman legions. When prepared correctly and packed tightly, this preserved meat could last for months, even during travel in the Mediterranean heat. The importance of salt wasn't confined to preservation. It was used in religious rituals, paid as wages, and even factored into early urban planning. Roman roads often led to salt mines or evaporation ponds. Families in both rural and urban areas stored salt in sealed ceramic vessels, usually kept in dry, cool corners of the household. The strategic location of these containers ensured that the salt remained free from dampness and contamination. With salt came the possibility of storing other foods, beginning with the golden sweetness of honey. 2. Honey was the Romans' treasured sweetener, an all-purpose staple found in both humble huts and aristocratic villas. Known for its remarkable shelf life, honey not only sweetened desserts and wine, but also played a critical role in food preservation and medicine. Romans would use honey to coat fruits, nuts, and even cooked meats, sealing them in jars for later consumption. These honey-preserved goods could remain edible for years, a marvel in an age without refrigeration. Much of honey's lasting power comes from its unique chemical composition. Its low water content and natural acidity create an environment hostile to microbes. Romans didn't know the science behind it, but they knew that honeyed figs or dates lasted longer and tasted richer with time. Moreover, honey was often used as a wound dressing, applied directly to cuts and abrasions because of its antibacterial properties. Roman soldiers carried honey not only for sustenance, but also as a part of their field medical supplies. Beekeeping was a common practice, with many villas maintaining their own hives or pooling resources within communities to ensure a steady honey supply. With salt and honey establishing the foundation for preservation, the next item in the Roman stockpile was hard cheese. 3. Hard cheese. Unlike the soft cheeses of modern convenience, Roman cheese was built to endure. Crafted primarily from goat, sheep, or cow milk, the curds were separated, heavily salted, and pressed until nearly all moisture had been removed. The final product was a dense, durable cheese that could be stored for many months without spoilage. Cheese production was a routine part of rural Roman life. Farmers would create wheels of cheese during peak milk seasons and store them in cool, dry cellars. The salt content, once again, played the important role of preventing bacterial growth. These cheeses traveled well and became essential components of both domestic and military diets. Roman texts even mention specific types of cheese suited for long journeys. In the homes of the elite, aged cheeses were often paired with fruits or wine, while in military camps they provided compact, protein-rich sustenance. Connected to the reliability of cheese was another cornerstone of Roman diet and storage practice: dried legumes. 4th, dried legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, and broad beans were not only affordable, but also incredibly long-lasting when properly dried. These legumes were central to the Roman diet, providing essential nutrients, especially when meat was scarce or unavailable. Stored in clay amphorae or sacks suspended off the ground, Dried legumes could last for years, ready to be boiled into hearty stews or added to grain dishes. The popularity of legumes also stemmed from their adaptability. In poorer households, a pot of boiled lentils with herbs might constitute a full meal. In wealthier kitchens, legumes were incorporated into complex dishes with spices and preserved meats. Regardless of class, Romans appreciated the shelf-stable nature of these foods. They were easily transported and required only boiling water to prepare, a critical feature during sieges or long marches. As legumes formed the base of many meals, the enhancement of flavor came from a rather pungent yet beloved condiment, garum. Fifth, garum. This fermented fish sauce was ubiquitous in Roman cuisine. Produced by layering fish parts and salt in large vats and leaving them to ferment under the sun, garum was eventually strained and bottled for use in homes, taverns, and markets across the empire. The fermentation process preserved the sauce naturally, and once sealed in ceramic amphorae, garum remained usable for years. Garum's longevity was only one aspect of its value. It brought umami depth to otherwise bland meals, was used in recipes ranging from meat dishes to pastries, and was even believed to have medicinal properties. Families would often have their own favorite garum makers or regional blends, much like modern preferences for hot sauces or olive oils. In military camps, a small bottle of garum could turn a basic legume dish into a more satisfying and palatable meal, linking preservation with the morale of the troops. Preserved flavor was one part of the Roman storage strategy, but energy-rich sustenance was another, which brings us to dried fruits, especially figs and dates. 6. Dried fruits. These fruits, once sun-dried and packed in baskets or jars, became concentrated sources of sugars and nutrients. Drying reduced moisture to the point where spoilage was almost impossible under the right conditions. Traders, travelers, and soldiers all relied on dried fruits as travel food and emergency rations. Dried figs, for instance, were often harvested at peak ripeness and then laid out on woven mats to dehydrate under the sun. Once dried, they were stored in bundles or clay containers, often with a light coating of flour or ash to deter pests. Dates followed similar methods and were a prized import from the eastern provinces. Beyond their portability, dried fruits were used in cooking, often combined with cheese, nuts, or wine reductions to create both simple and extravagant dishes. Their inclusion in religious offerings and feast days further cemented their cultural importance. With dried fruits secured in the Roman pantry, the presence of olives and, more crucially, olive oil completed this essential suite of preserved goods. 7. Olives or olive oil. Olives themselves were cured and stored in brine or vinegar, making them last through seasons. But it was olive oil that truly symbolized Roman domestic life. Used for cooking, lighting, cleaning, and personal hygiene, olive oil was arguably the most versatile product in the ancient Roman world. Pressing olives into oil was a highly ritualized and seasonal process. The freshly pressed oil, known as oleum, was poured into amphorae sealed with wax or resin to maintain freshness. These containers lined kitchen walls, storerooms, and trading vessels alike. Olive oil was often infused with herbs or combined with vinegar to preserve vegetables, legumes, or even cooked meats. Amphorae containing Roman olive oil have been discovered in shipwrecks, still sealed. With olive oil flowing through Roman households and trade routes, the need for another staple, grain, naturally followed. 8. Grain, particularly wheat, spelt, and barley, was the cornerstone of the Roman diet and the foundation of the empire's food security. Entire logistics systems revolved around the storage and distribution of grain, from Egypt's grain fleets to Rome's public granaries. When properly stored in sealed silos or clay jars in elevated dry spaces, grain could remain viable for years. Romans consumed it in the form of bread, porridge, pulse, and gruel, and it formed the base of nearly every meal, regardless of social class. The handling and measurement of grain were so important that officials were assigned to oversee its flow within cities and ports. In times of famine, grain was the first resource distributed by the state. highlighting its importance not only as food but as a tool of political stability. Grain's longevity and storability made it an indispensable part of both household pantries and state-run supply systems, especially in a society that stretched across so many geographical extremes. Closely related to grain was another form of staple storage: dried nuts. 9. Dried nuts. Almonds, walnuts, and pine nuts were particularly valued by the Romans, not just for their taste, but for their high caloric value and ability to last for extended periods when properly stored. Nuts were harvested in bulk during autumn and laid out to dry thoroughly, sometimes even roasted lightly to ensure lower moisture content. Afterward, they were stored in sealed clay containers or pouches made of animal hide. The resulting product was resistant to spoilage and ideal for storage through the winter months or for military campaigns. Dried nuts were more than just emergency rations, they were culinary additions to many Roman recipes. Crushed nuts were used to thicken sauces, flavor pastries, or top-baked dishes. They were often paired with honey to form early dessert-like confections or mixed with dried fruits as an energy-rich snack. In Roman medicine, walnuts were believed to aid brain health due to their shape, and pine nuts were ground into salves and cosmetics. Their versatility and longevity made them a constant presence in Roman pantries. As nuts stored well in amphorae and sacks, another grain-based but differently processed product also became essential: dried flatbreads and hard biscuits. 10. Dried flatbreads and hard biscuits. These were not the soft, fresh loaves seen in city bakeries, but tough, dry rounds made specifically for storage. Commonly known as bucellatum or panis militaris, these breads were double-baked, removing as much moisture as possible. Though nearly inedible without soaking or softening, they were prized for their durability. Roman soldiers carried them on long marches, and households kept them as backup rations. These bread discs could last for months and were often softened with wine, milk, or water before eating. They served as the backbone of many simple meals and were sometimes crumbled into soups or stews. In regions prone to drought or instability, they were a reliable solution to unpredictable grain supply chains. Their production was methodical, often assigned to designated public bakeries where efficiency and uniformity could be maintained. Through bucellatum, the Roman approach to preservation extended even to baked goods. 11th. Pickled vegetables. With baked items secured for long-term use, another ingenious preservation method arose: pickled vegetables. Romans made extensive use of vinegar, a byproduct of winemaking, to extend the life of fresh produce. Cucumbers, onions, garlic, and cabbages were among the most commonly pickled items. These vegetables were washed, salted, and submerged in vinegar or a brine mixture, then stored in tightly lidded clay jars that kept pests and air out. Served two important purposes. First, they offered nutritional diversity during seasons when fresh greens were unavailable. Second, the acidic tang added flavor to otherwise plain meals. Roman physicians even promoted pickled garlic and onions as digestive aids, while the vinegars themselves were used in medicinal tonics. The integration of pickling into Roman households and markets was widespread, and recipes varied by region, each adapting local vegetables to this timeless technique. While pickling relied on liquid preservation, another dry method focused on meat, smoked and air-dried sausages. 12. Smoked and air-dried sausages. Sausages such as lucanica were spiced, salted, and then either hung to dry or smoked over low fires. This curing process drew out moisture and created an environment hostile to bacterial growth. Once dried, these sausages could last for months and were easy to transport. Lucanica was believed to originate from the region of Lucania, and Roman writers like Apicius included sausage recipes in their culinary texts. These sausages were often eaten with bread, beans, or porridge, and provided dense calories in a compact form. They were also a feature in celebratory meals or temple offerings, linking practicality with cultural practice. The crafting of preserved meats became a specialized skill, and certain regions became known for their unique sausage recipes. 13. wine with meat preserved through drying and spices, attention turned next to another liquid that lasted generations: wine. Roman wine, when stored correctly, aged remarkably well. Amphorae sealed with resin or wax kept out air and bacteria, allowing the wine to mature rather than spoil. Romans drank their wine diluted, flavored with herbs or honey, and even heated it during winter. Left undiluted and kept sealed, wine could endure for decades. Wine storage reflected the Roman dedication to longevity. Entire underground cellars were devoted to aging amphorae, and wine became a form of wealth as well as sustenance. In addition to drinking, wine served as a base for sauces and marinades and was used medicinally to cleanse wounds or ease digestive issues. Its significance in religion and society ensured that families always reserved a place for wine among their essential food stores. 14. Mustard seeds and preserved pastes. Now, among the ingredients that stood the test of time, mustard seeds and the pungent pastes made from them were some of the most reliable. Romans would grind mustard seeds into a fine powder, then mix them with vinegar, wine, or grape must to create a spicy paste that not only added depth to bland foods, but also lasted indefinitely when sealed properly. These pastes were stored in ceramic pots with wax-sealed lids and could be used months after preparation. Since vinegar and must are both acidic, they helped preserve the paste while enhancing its flavor over time. Romans often added herbs like dill or coriander, creating variations that suited different dishes. A spoon of mustard could brighten up salted meats, revive dry legumes, or transform hard biscuits into something far more satisfying. For Roman cooks, it wasn't just about having food that lasted, it was about having taste that endured too. With the inclusion of mustard, the Roman pantry didn't just preserve life, it preserved flavor, identity, and the memory of meals shared across generations. 15. Vinegar rounding. Off this collection of imperishable items was vinegar itself. As a transformation of wine gone sour, vinegar became an invaluable commodity. Romans used it to pickle, clean, disinfect, and cook. Soldiers famously drank a diluted vinegar solution called posca, which was both hydrating and mildly antiseptic. In the home, vinegar preserved perishables, tenderized meat, and even polished bronze. Stored in sealed jugs and often mixed with herbs, vinegar was one of the most multi-purpose liquids in a Roman household. Its acidic strength gave it an almost infinite shelf life. With vinegar, Romans closed the circle of preservation, from salt-dried meats to honeyed fruits, smoked sausages to fermented sauces. Across these 15 carefully chosen and cleverly preserved staples, we did not just uncover a list of foods, we uncovered a system. The Roman pantry was a quiet triumph of planning, resourcefulness, and respect for nature's timing. Each item, whether salted, dried, smoked, fermented, or pickled. The Roman world was one of movement. Armies marched for months, traders crossed seas, farmers worked through droughts, and families survived winters in the mountains or months of siege in the cities. None of this was possible without food that could be trusted to last. And while modern kitchens overflow with gadgets and preservatives, the Roman kitchen leaned entirely on natural methods, clever storage, and deep knowledge passed through generations. What makes this list more remarkable is the care Romans put into every part of preservation, not just the how, but the why. Salt wasn't just rubbed on meat, it was measured, stored, and sometimes even taxed. Honey wasn't just poured into jars, it was harvested by communal effort, sealed with precision, and guarded like gold. Cheese wasn't only made fresh, it was designed to age, travel, and return home unchanged. These foods were strategies, backup plans, and lifelines. Every amphora, cellar shelf, and soldier's ration bag was filled with items that held stories of harvests and wars, of family meals and state politics, of humble kitchens and imperial banquets. But what truly connected all these preserved foods was not just their endurance, but their intimacy with time. Romans weren't afraid of letting things age. In fact, they celebrated it. Their wines matured, their cheeses sharpened, their sauces deepened, their olives softened. Time wasn't the enemy of flavor, it was the secret ingredient. And with patience came reward. Even today, their legacy lives on. The methods the Romans perfected over 2 millennia ago are still with us. Salt-cured meats, dried legumes, pickled vegetables, smoked sausages, aged cheese, honey-preserved fruits, and herb-infused oils all still exist in our kitchens, often unchanged in technique, only modernized in packaging.